We're in Psalm 144, verses 1 through 15, the prayers of a Christian leader. So let's read starting in verse 1. May the Lord my rock be praised, who trains my hands for battle and my fingers for warfare. He is my faithful love and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer. He is my shield, and I take refuge in him. He subdues my people under me. Lord, what is man that you care for him, the son of man that you think of him? Man is like a breath. His days are like a passing shadow. Lord, part your heavens and come down. Touch the mountains, and they will smoke. Flash your lightning and scatter the foe. Shoot your arrows and rout them. Reach down from on high. Rescue me from deep water, and set me free from the grasp of foreigners whose mouths speak lies, whose right hands are deceptive. God, I will sing a new song to you. I will play on a 10-stringed harp for you, the one who gives victory to kings, who frees his servant David from the deadly sword. Set me free and rescue me from the grasp of foreigners whose mouths speak lies, whose right hands are deceptive. Then our sons will be like plants nurtured in their youth, our daughters like corner pillars that are carved in the palace style. Our storehouses will be full, supplying all kinds of produce. Our flocks will increase by thousands and tens of thousands in our open fields. Our cattle will be well fed. There will be no breach in the walls, no going into captivity, and no cry of lament in our public squares. Happy are the people with such blessings. Happy are the people whose God is the Lord. Now here we have the prayers of a Christian leader. We have the prayer of King David. It says, if you read your subtitles, a king's prayer, and it's Davidic, meaning that King David wrote this. And you may have heard of the Lord's Prayer. You may have heard of Jehoshaphat's prayer, or even Jabez's prayer in 1 Chronicles chapter 4. Here we have David's, what I call leadership prayer. It's called a soldier's prayer normally because of its military tone, but because it's attributed to David, I think it's more of a prayer for Christian leaders. And this is a prayer that leaders pray. If you read through this, you'll see that. It's not just the standard prayer of any individual, because David addresses issues that directly affect leaders. Now, it has similarities to Psalm 18. And in Psalm 18, David wrote about his struggle against Saul. Saul was chasing him, and David cried out to God for help. This psalm is attributed to David, but it's in the middle of a set of psalms that were about the return of the Israelites in the Babylonian exile. And so the style of Psalm 144 is like writing today about the greatness of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. And so you take the quotes that you remember and you put them together and they form a new psalm. That's the reason why some of these quotes in Psalm 144 look very similar to Psalm 18. They took these words that reflect the events and life of King David, and they apply these words to their present situation in the exile. And so that's the reason why in the Greek translation, for example, the psalm is attributed to David against Goliath, because they're reflecting back on the time when David was against Goliath. But I want you to focus on basically the 7 prayers that every Christian leader prays. And some of you may say, well, yeah, every Christian may pray this. That may be true. In some ways, a Christian is always a leader when we disciple others. If we take 2 Timothy 2:2 seriously, if we take the words of Jesus seriously, then we know that there's going to be times in which we're mentoring others. There's going to be times in which we are leading others in the faith. And so, in some sense, this is true for every single Christian. But it aptly applies to Christian leadership. Now, let me start with the first one, to train me. In verse 1, it says, "May the Lord my rock be praised, who trains my hands for battle and my fingers for warfare." It's a warfare image. But David blesses God. He prays to God and praises God because God has trained David. And so David is saying, my personal battle skills come from God. And as a Christian leader, we will give credit to God for the skills that they've personally developed. An honest Christian leader, a submissive Christian leader, a Christian leader who recognizes that they follow God will show and say that they were trained by God. They won't necessarily say that all their skills came because of their great self-worth or the idea that they developed them themselves. They'll attribute that to God. They'll say that I was able to be a great pastor because God led me that way. That I was able to be a great discipleship leader because God led me in these ways. He trained me in these ways. He showed me how to be a discipleship leader. Whatever the case may be, your skills, because that's what's being trained here, are skills, come from God's hand. Second, we see the prayer of protect me. It says, He is my faithful love and my fortress, my stronghold and my deliverer. He is my shield, and I take refuge in him. He subdues my people under me. Psalm 144 sounds very similar to Psalm 44 when it talks about taking refuge and being a fortress and a stronghold. This is a common phrase throughout the Psalms. And even though David has sufficient skills to engage in battle, he still trusts in God to protect him. And you would think that a king and a soldier would say, well, I've got enough armor, I can take care of myself. You know, my armor is sufficient. I've got enough high tech that I can take care of this battle. I've got enough metal that I can take care of this battle. You know, my shield will protect me. My armor will protect me. But no, David attributes this as well to God. He extends it and says it's not just my shield that protects me, that God is my shield who protects me. And so he's not arrogant to the point of being self-sufficient. He's recognizing that even everything that he's made, everything that he owns, comes from God. And as a Christian leader, you'll be under attack. And people will say many things about you that will be untrue. And they will say things that hurt you. And when these things happen, you need to ask God to protect you because no one else will. And by the way, just a side note, you will notice some similarities to some of the statements in here to Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 17, in which Paul is comparing the armor of God to a shield in the armor of a Roman soldier, and how God protects us and gives us defensive abilities and even attack weapons against the devil. So you see a little bit of this image here, that God protects his people. And he arms his people to be able to attack Satan and defend against Satan. And David is recognizing that. He's saying that God is my shield, God is my refuge. And notice that last phrase, he subdues my people under me. Phrasing meaning that subdues peoples, meaning that David is not the conqueror of other people. David is not the attacker. David is not the one who gets the victory done. It's God. Then we hear the next phrase that a Christian leader will pray. And by the way, this may all come at different times. You know, the first two of training me and protect me may come at a different time than when we ask, hear me. In verses 3 through 4, it says, Lord, what is man that you care for him? The son of man that you think of him? Sounds like echoes of Psalm 8, by the way. Man is like a breath, and his days are like a passing shadow. Psalm 8:4, same phrase. The psalmist is reflecting on the condition of the human lifespan. Life is like a breath, here today, gone tomorrow. And people may question the purpose and significance of life at times. The writer of Ecclesiastes did that. David's son. Absolute futility, says the teacher. Absolute futility. Everything is futile. Job reflected on that in chapter 7, verse 16. He says, I give up. I'll not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are a breath. And so there is this time in which you may ask God to hear you because you are in such distress. And you may wonder, is God listening to you? Will God listen to you? Time is short, and I'm having difficulty. And I need God to listen to me. And as you get closer to God in prayer, and as you reflect on your situation, you'll begin to realize how futile at times it can be. You may feel like giving up. And the psalmist here is at this point in his prayer life. He's screaming at God because he doesn't sense God's presence as close as he once did. And you may say, well, didn't we just say this in verse 3 and 4 that, and then earlier that God was going to protect me? Like I want to reflect during this psalm, these prayers may come at different times in your life. Verse 1 may be at a different time in your life than verse 3 or 4. And sometimes as a leader, you may feel all the pressures of life are against you. You may sense the weight and wonder if God is really there sometimes. And you may say, well, can a leader question or wonder the existence of God? Of course. It doesn't matter how spiritual you are. When the stresses of leadership mount, you may have trouble sensing the presence of God. You know, a lot of people that have challenging situations in life, stresses in life, depressing situations, they may begin to wonder a lot of things. They may wonder about the fickleness of life. And this emotion will pass in prayer. But you can't stop there. You can't just ask, hear me. You have to continue. And when you do, you'll go from hear me to help me. Now in verses 5 and 6, it says, Lord, part your heavens and come down. Touch the mountains and they will smoke. Flash your lightning and scatter the foe. Shoot your arrows and rout them. Notice that, of course, this phrase in verses 5 and 6 sound completely different from 3 and 4. And that means that we've gone from hear me to help me. We've gone from distress to asking for God to make an effort. The leader goes from asking to be heard to asking for help. Now, I don't know about you, but when I ask God to listen to me, it quickly comes to a point where I ask for God's help. It goes quickly from hear me to help me. Because you recognize if God is going to listen to you, then you need to ask for his help because you know he can take action. And that brings us to the fifth point, rescue me. In verses 7 and 8, it says, reach down from on high. Rescue me from deep water, and set me free from the grasp of foreigners whose mouths speak lies, whose right hands are deceptive. And you may notice initially, well, wait a minute, didn't he just talk about, training me for battle and being faithful and being a deliverer and protecting me? And now he's asking about hearing and helping me, and we switch to rescuing me, and we're switching from protecting me on land to now maybe rescuing me from water. Yeah, because it's in every kind of circumstance in life that we ask God for help. We don't just ask God for help when things are completely bad in one place. We also ask God for help in another environment as well. The submarine Squalus and its crew lay helpless at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, 245 feet below the surface, and the crew sent up smoke flares hoping that their location would be known. The submarine Sculpin did not locate them. A 10-ton diving bell was lowered several times, bringing to safety the 33 surviving members of the crew of the ill-fated Squalus. Not one of the 33 men said to their rescuers, I'll think it over, or I'll wait for a more convenient season, or I'm in good condition as I am. There's too much to give up, or I don't understand it until tomorrow. All instantly and gratefully accepted the means of escape from death. When you ask God for help and you ask him to rescue you, you're going to take the help when it comes. And you do that. That's what we do in prayer. We don't just ask God to help us and then step away. We want God to be there for us. And because we want to be truthful to him. We want to be faithful to him. And that brings me to number 6, receive me. Again, notice that we're shifting. Here we're shifting from pleading to praising. We're shifting from distress to doxology. We're shifting from the idea that I don't know how I'm going to be able to get through this to praise God, you just helped me through this. Look with me in verses 9 through 11. God, I will sing you a new song to you. I will play on a 10-string harp for you. The one who gives victory to kings, who frees his servant David from the deadly sword. Set me free and rescue me from foreigners whose mouths speak lies, whose right hands are deceptive. Notice that phrase is said twice, first in verse 8 and again in verse 11. I think that's significant because that's something that's on the mind of this particular king. You will notice, of course, that he talks about warfare earlier and that there's these peoples that need to be submitted under him in verse 2. And then he's wondering about life and that breath, a man is like breath, and then he's like, take care of business, be bold, God, in verses 5 and 6, and rout your, shoot your arrows and rout them. So obviously what's been on this king's mind are some enemies. Obviously he's had some people that have betrayed him. Obviously he's had foreign enemies that have been against him. And I want you to notice that at this point, as we're going through this prayer, it's intensifying with David that he's still angry and upset at people that have been against him. Now, one of the things you notice about leadership when you lead is there's going to be a lot of people who don't like the way you do things. Matter of fact, they won't like what you do, they won't like how you do it, and they don't like where, when, or in what flavor you like to do something. And they're going to make it known to you or everybody else. And some may even try to completely destroy what you're doing, become your enemy, if you will. And, you know, it is unhealthy for a leader to keep that in, because it will destroy a leader from the inside. You've got to have some mechanism of dealing with it. And David is doing that here in his prayer. He is venting upward, if you will. And so when he's talking about receiving me after rescuing me, I want you to understand that he is still dealing with people who have been against him. Even in the midst of people who are completely against him and that social pressure and that stress, he's still venting it to God. And I say this because, you know, if you don't do that, you'll never be better. You'll end up staying bitter as a leader. And you never can be a very effective leader if you continue to be bitter at people at the way they've treated you. And so it's important to vent that to God. And that, I think one of the focuses of this particular prayer that we need to be reminded is when we are continually frustrated about individuals or people that have done different things, we've got to eventually vent it to God and leave it with him. And we've got to, because the stresses of leadership can overwhelm you if you don't. And notice here that when God has rescued me, I recognize that this is all by the help of God alone. I can choose to praise and worship God. And let me also say that choosing to praise and worship God is a choice. Okay? I want you to understand, when we say that we're praying to God, receive me, and we're praising God, that is a choice. And when we're in a leadership situation where we're upset at people and how they've treated us for whatever we've done, I can choose to still be upset, or I can choose to let it go and start worshiping God and be in the presence of him and let God comfort me through my challenges that I'm going through. And so this particular portion of the prayer is when David asked God to receive worship. And sometimes the best way to ask God to help me is to sing to him. In his book, The Songs That Lift the Heart, gospel singer George Beverly Shea tells of his friend Bert Friesen of Wheaton, Illinois. While attending college in Wheaton, Bert distinguished himself with his fine baritone voice. But his college studies were interrupted by the war. Serving in Germany during World War II, he was seriously wounded and lay dying for 6 hours. He passed in and out of consciousness, aware at each waking that his life was ebbing faster and faster. And to face that moment, he began singing a hymn to his mother that his mother had taught him. There is a name to me so dear, like sweetest music to my ear. For when my heart is troubled, feared with fear, Jesus whispers peace. And as he sang, a German soldier came upon him, his bayonet fixed. Bert anticipated the worst, but kept singing. And as he sang, he felt himself being lifted up, and he was carried to a nearby stone ledge. And there the enemy soldier left Bert unharmed. And a few minutes later, he was discovered and rescued by his own medics. Now, of course, what I want you to understand is that worship heals us. When we ask God to help us, when we ask God to receive us, then we begin to be in a healing mode. And that's necessary for a leader, because the next prayer that you can pray is bless me. But I want you to understand, you can't ask God to bless you if at first you haven't been broken. If at first you've not dealt with your difficulties that you're going through. If you've not gone to the point where you've overcome your challenges and overcome your bitterness to the point to where you're worshiping God, you'll never be able to see the blessings that God wants to bring to you. Because your mind is so focused on all these challenges and difficulties and people and frustrations that are in your mind that you haven't opened to worship Him, to be ready for the blessings that He provides for you. So it's necessary. It's necessary to get over your hurt, get over your challenges to the point where you worship Him so that you're ready to receive the blessings. Notice this, bless me, verses 12 through 15. Then our sons will be like plants nurtured in their youth, our daughters like corner pillars that are carved in the palace style. Our storehouses will be full, supplying all kinds of produce. Our flocks will increase by thousands and tens of thousands in our open fields. Our cattle will be well fed. There'll be no breach in the walls, no going into captivity, and no cry of lament in the public squares. Happy are the people with such blessings. Happy are the people whose God is the Lord. Now, notice the blessings are tied to God. The blessings are not tied to me. And as a matter of fact, notice that David is talking about his sons and daughters. He's talking about the next generation. He's talking about the prosperity that has come. But he attributes all that prosperity to God. This does not happen all by himself. It happens as a result of God. And so you move in your prayer life from asking for help from God to asking for the blessing of God. And the blessing is not for yourself personally. A leader asks God to bless them so that the blessing can impact others. Notice here how the impact of the blessing impacts so many other people. Sons, daughters, storehouses, cattle are all impacted by the blessings of God. God's blessing is what leads to happiness. This psalm shows a progression in the prayer life of a leader. Leaders go from asking for training to asking for blessing. And by the way, you can't get this in reverse order. You know, if leaders go into a situation just asking for God's blessing, but they haven't been trained, they haven't been hurt, they haven't gone through challenges, they haven't overcome them, they haven't come to the point of worship, they haven't come to the point of being rescued, they haven't come to the point where they see that God is able to bless them. They need to have all those steps for the blessings to impact their life. You may say, well, can't they have blessings first? Of course they can have blessings first. But I will tell you that a Christian leader will appreciate the blessings of God much more when they've gone through this progression. When they've gone through the training, when they've gone through the hard times, when they've gone through the need for worship, when they've gone for the need to cry out to Him, then when the blessings come, what are you going to do with those blessings? You're going to be praising God a lot more for them. A leader who has not gone through that process may indirectly or directly, incorrectly attribute the blessings to themselves. Hey, I'm great. Everything's going great because of me. But when a leader has gone through this process and these challenges that happen in their lives, then they're more likely to recognize God in those blessings and attribute much more to Him. Because when it comes to leadership and it comes to leading people, it isn't just about me. It isn't just about you. It doesn't fall all on me, and it doesn't fall all on you. God is responsible for everything that happens in my life, good and bad, and He is going to help me through them all. And you may say, well, God, did He directly bring all these bad things? No, not necessarily. Remember, the enemies that came for David here were by themselves angry at David. But we have to recognize that God is the source of everything that we go through to help us through these things. He trains me. He helps me. I rely on Him. He rescues me. He listens to me. He helps me. I worship Him. And then He provides blessings for me. And so you get to the point where leadership doesn't become all about the individual person who's leading. It becomes about God using me as a servant. And you end up being a servant leader like you're supposed to. And showing this progression and entering this struggle also brings the realization it sets in control the life and happiness that are in the hands of God alone.